Thank you again for joining us. And at this point, I'll turn things over to Atul.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, I know, for some of you. Welcome to the IAOP Governance Chapter webinar. So just a little plug for the Governance Chapter. We are focused on promoting and enhancing the practice of governance, particularly in outsourcing arrangements. So one of the things we do as a chapter is provide and share case studies. And so we invite all of you to please reach out to me and provide ideas on what topics we should cover, and also happy to take suggestions on speakers. Without further ado, so one of the things we've been doing this year is covering a number of governance practices. So we started the year with a governance webinar on what New Year's resolutions should you be taking or making on governance. So what would be some key governance practices? So as we go through this year, we will bring you case studies from different companies so you can learn from how others are doing it. And I think a great example of what we have seen is the state of Georgia, particularly the Georgia Technology Authority, which truly, if you were to look at it, and I think you'll hear from our speaker, is the size of a Fortune 500 company. So think about, even though this is a state of the United States, but think about how a Fortune 500 company kind of approaches this whole topic of governance. So without further ado, if we turn to the next slide, I'm delighted to have the Sourcing Governance Officer and a fellow IAOP Strategic Advisory Board member. Mark has been with the state of Georgia since 2012 and is responsible for governing the sourcing arrangements that the Georgia Technology Authority have. And really, for me, he's one of the key leaders that I have seen in my career who really focuses on how should the governance be right-sized, and more importantly, how do we make sure that governance takes the responsibility for getting more from our outsourcing contracts. So Mark, welcome to the webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you in terms of how you are doing governance at the Georgia Technology Authority.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Nicole, and welcome everybody. When I talk about governance, the first thing I want to say is that governance to me is one of those things, like Atul said, is how can you get the most of your contracts? So that's kind of what we're focusing on. And I do want to make sure that everybody on the call, if I were to ask you at the end, you get at least one nugget that you can take back to your organization and use it and get some benefits from it. So be thinking about that as we go through. Government is a little bit different from public sector, but I'd also like to focus on a lot of the similarities that we have. Like Atul said, we think we're a Fortune 75 company, if you look at it. But what we're going to be talking about is how we have some similarities, and then again, taking that nugget. So how might the state of Georgia be similar to you? So if we go to the next one, Atul, we'll talk about that. Yeah, the next one, sorry, Atul. There we go. So on the left side, you'll see really the state of Georgia and how big it is. It's a $50 billion company, 120 departments, probably like you, some departments large, some departments small, but about 68,000 employees. If you look on the right side, it's kind of what we've done with GETS. So GETS, the Georgia Enterprise Technology Services, we're an authority, not an agency, a little bit different for those of you that don't know. But we actually have to make money. We do not get any funds from tax dollars. So anything we do, we have to make profits and then use those profits. We use those profits to invest in what we're doing. So if you look at this, we've consolidated about 80% of the left side, which is all of the state of Georgia. And as you can see by the numbers, we have about 80% of the state consolidated into one IT infrastructure. And that's about 40,000 end users, about 54,000 email accounts, almost 2 terabytes of storage space, and a whole bunch of servers. So one more general slide, if you go to the next one, Atul, is about our history of consolidation. We're really, oh, sorry, go ahead, Atul.
Yep, Mark, I was just going to say before we go there, so Mark, this how did the Georgia Technology Authority actually come about?
Good question. So it's been around since 2000, and its first purpose was a little different than its purpose today. When it was first started, we actually, here in the state of Georgia, take data from the Driver's License Bureau. And people will have to ask if they, I'm used to talking to United States folks, so if there is any foreign people and we need to ask questions, please ask Atul. But we take a bunch of data from the Driver's License Bureau and we repackage that so people can look for felon searches, do biography checks, do different checks on different people to look for those. And that's how it actually started. So that's where some of the original money for this investment to consolidate came from. In 2008 is actually when we consolidated everything. When the governor, if I were to maybe paraphrase what the governor was saying in 2008, is that I'm not really sure where the state data is, but if I did find it, I'm probably not sure that the data is even secure. So that's when GTA then said, we have to do something, and the governor gave the authority to the GETS, to GTA, to make sure we did that. It wasn't to save money when we consolidated, it was actually to make the state's data safer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's good to know kind of, what, because it's a unique program. It's not that all 50 states in the United States don't have exactly the same program. So it's good to know that.
Okay, thank you. So if we go to the next one, again, this is a slide that, just one more slide about history of consolidation. So if you look at this on the left-hand side, it kind of gives a description of all of our customers. And our customers range anywhere from somebody getting a POTS line, a phone call, all the way to getting mainframe security and the whole list of infrastructure services you probably provide your customers. Really standard shared services in that 14 GETS agencies, those 40,000 users. The 1,200 again, plus anything from a phone line and a phone at their desk, all the way to maybe some LAN and WAN connections. So pre-2008, just to give you kind of an example, the state of Georgia, in this 80% section, had 21 data centers, 23 help desks, a decentralized network. Problems were going to the governor on a daily basis. We had over 700 contracts. We had absolutely no disaster recovery and very little service management. Everybody was doing it on their own. Every agency had an IT department. So what we were trying to do was deliver, which is what's on the right side, and post 2008, we had the consolidation. So we ended up with, back in 2008, we had one supplier. I'll generalize and say one supplier. So that was back in the day of, let's get one big humongous company to do all of our stuff for us. And they did. And then all the way, if we go through the spectrum between 2008 and 2015, 2015 was when we changed our model and actually went to a multi-sourcing integrating model. So now we have one person, one company that actually helps us manage all of our other suppliers doing all of those other things, the phone service, the network, the mainframe, the disaster recovery. And we have more than 8 suppliers doing that today. The reason we wanted to do that was competitive pricing, safety of our network, the ability from a governance standpoint for step-in rights. If one provider goes bad, we have a problem. If just one provider doesn't do what they're supposed to do, the whole infrastructure doesn't go down. So again, what's like you, what could be like you is those 14 agencies. We have a mixture of large departments, medium departments, small departments. It's something ranging up from maybe a 6,000 or 7,000 person department all the way down to a department that might be 6 people only. This ranges, just so you kind of know the scope of this, it's Department of Human Services, it's Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the state version of the FBI, Department of Revenue, the state version of taxes, Driver Services we talked about, Georgia Department of Corrections, the prisons, the governor's office, which usually gets the most calls about white glove treatment, as you guys would probably expect, Secretary of State, which is all the voting, and OPB, which is I would call it our finance, the state's finance department. So all of this, just to say, really, this is a spectrum or a journey. We started it back in 2008. We made a big step in 2015. And I would say in 2016 is when we started moving towards a better governance model. As Atul said, we thought and we know that governance is important. One of the things that was helping us was, I would say, if you ask people about governance before, they would say, oh, you guys are like the police. You put out your hand and you yell stop when somebody's doing something wrong. And then when they don't stop, you just yell stop again. And that was the case. Now we believe that we are in the position where people are saying, especially when there's a problem, okay, well, where's that problem in the governance path? And how is it moving through the path? And how is it being solved? And how is it being solved by the right people in the right time frame? So we feel like we've made a huge step in just what people think about governance, from the police to something they want to use to help solve their problems.
Yeah, one of the things, Mark, when I look at this, it's a couple of things that really stand out. First, while it's limited by geography, the scale is massive. And then the second is that the diversity of the agencies, which is, in many cases, if we think about diversity of product lines, diversity of the requirements of those product lines, is amazingly different and massive. So I'm really excited about the next set of slides. Again, to the audience, please feel free to use the Q&A and the chat function to make sure you ask for any clarifications. Also, please feel free to add your ideas, anything that may be unique to you that you are doing that applies to this area.
You bring up a good point of tools. So for example, we actually deal with problems, IT problems that actually we consider life and limb problems. It could be the death of a child. It could be down to child support. It could be hospitals at our prison systems, people losing legs. All of those things happen on a daily basis. And if the IT systems aren't in place and aren't working as expected, those bad things happen. And that's usually when everything gets bypassed and the governor gets a call. So that's why we think governance is extremely important in preventing a lot of that stuff from happening, so everything doesn't get escalated right past the system all the way up to the governor's office. Mm-hmm. And in private world, I assume people, want to tell the CEO. I've been there. I worked for UPS for almost 20 years. People want to tell the CEO that their problems are the biggest problems in the company and somebody needs to work on them immediately. So again, this is the spectrum. If you go to the next slide, Atul, it's really, how did we get here? So I talked about the spectrum. I imagine that you on the call are somewhere on that spectrum in many categories, whether you're on the left side of the spectrum for distributed versus the right side on consolidated, whether you have 2 suppliers or multiple suppliers, whether you have 700 contracts or 800 or 8 contracts, or whether you have 21 data centers and 23 help desks versus 1 data center and 1 help desk, whether you're CapEx or OpEx. Those are all the different things that we are weighing all the time, trying to move ourselves to the right side of the spectrum or towards approaching the end of the journey. So how did we get here on the spectrum? We had to ask ourselves all these questions on a daily basis, if not bi hourly. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So many questions here. If you look at this, one of my favorite ones, can we go back to the questions?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
That's all right. If we look at this, one of my big things here at GTA is whether we have an ecosystem or individual suppliers down there on the bottom left. So are all of our suppliers working together, or are they pointing fingers at each other? So you guys know the drill. You have a server problem. Is it really a communications problem? Is it a server problem? Is it a help desk problem? We're trying to solve that with our governance. So all of those things can be prevented, and it becomes more of an ecosystem rather than just a bunch of individual suppliers. Mm-hmm. We're also looking at if you look at the right people, the right information, and the right timing to make those decisions. It's extremely important to us to make sure we have the right infrastructure, the right governance infrastructure in place to make sure that happens. And if you look at the contract expectations, we ask ourselves all the time, are we expecting the right things from our contracts? Do we have all the right risks? Are we doing the right actions to reduce those risks, and are all the issues in place? And then we actually look at even the reporting and how we're reporting against deliverables and obligations, whether they're timely, whether they're complete. All of these things are really hitting us. And then we're trying to figure out now, as we get even towards the end of this, I'll tell you that we aren't there yet. A lot of our stuff is being done on spreadsheets. We're doing it manually. We have people doing it, spending hours on it, and we're working towards automation. We feel that that is the way to go. We feel that automation, right now, we're missing some of our deliverables and obligations. We aren't extracting all the value we can, and we think automation will help us get there. So what's the answer to all these questions that we just asked ourselves? Our answer to ourselves, is governance. So if we go to the next one.
Right. Before we do that, Nicole, as for some reason, the key I am not able to see. So if you don't mind, if you keep continuing at this slide, please.
Okay, so we have two questions right now. One of them was, do you apply multi-provider approach for mainframe infrastructure? And then another one was, did you develop this approach with the support of consultants or source funds?
When we first went into the multi-provider approach, we thought we would be able to have more competition within each service line. It turns out, as probably because of your question, that it's very hard to do that. What we ended up doing was having all of the competitors that did not win the big deal. They're on other contracts that can do work for the rest of the state, and they are the people that we use for step-in rights if ever needed. So that's the answer to question number one. No, we don't have multi-providers in mainframe. The second one is, did we use consultants? Yes, we use Integris Applied. We use many consultants. We even had some consultants to help us with our governance. But there are experts out there. I'm sure you can find some. If you want any information from me, we can work through Nicole and get that. If you are looking for specific people, I can help you out there. But yes, our consultants have been with us all throughout the multi-sourcing integration approach when we're building it.
Right. I think, this, just to reinforce, Mark, great benefit to advisors or specialists that have done it so many more times before, to bring that expertise to you, and then you being able to customize or help customize that to your environment.
Yes, an extremely big help getting an outside view. Again, people that, just like Atul said, people have been doing it a long time. Okay, so gets governance. To me, governance is a generic term. You ask 10 people, you probably get 10 different answers. Matter of fact, I would say you ask 100 people, you probably get 100. So what we decided was we really needed to make sure that we marketed what we thought governance was and what we thought we wanted it to do. And we did not want it to be that cop that put their hand out that said, stop, stop again. We really wanted people to want to use governance. And in order to do that, we developed our mission. You can read it there, but it's really making sure that the best possible decisions get made by the right people, the right time frame, the right information, and most importantly, in the best interests of the states and agencies. So it's not in the best interest of any one agency. It should be in the best interest of the state or multiple agencies, and that's how we work. And the purpose of the governance program, and I'll just paraphrase here, is basically make sure all the work gets done at the most efficient level. So in 2008, it could end up getting solved by the COO or the VPs or whatever. Now we solve many, many problems at the lower level, and very few get escalated. It's also a problem that we'll talk about later, that we think more things ought to be escalated, but really that's where we are. So I would say, after talking about all this, we've through this whole integration, through the spectrum, moving from the left to the right, we've really come across many, many problems. And you guys can email me and ask me about those problems. We'll talk about some of them here. But again, as Atul said, the consultants have seen these as well. But all of this is just to lead up to say, here's where we are today. So if we look at the next slide, when we talk about governance, many people around here would say, okay, the baseline for governance is the governance forums. Meetings, the governance meetings. So some people may go, well, you know, if meetings are working for governance, why not have more meetings? The more meetings, the better. We've been through that. We probably had, when we first started the governance, we probably ended up with about 40 meetings, and we have trimmed that back to 27. And I'm sure many people, I'm surprised Nicole's not jumping in there going, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of questions. Why would you have 27 meetings? But if you look down the list, some of the meetings are for different customers. Some of the meetings are agencies, for agencies and customers, change review boards, what have you. So they range the gamut of what's in here. So I'm going to tell you some of the good results that we've got from having these meetings, and that is getting the right people at the meetings. So previous to this, we would have anybody saying, oh yeah, I think we can fix that, or I'll go get somebody to help me fix it. Now we have the right meetings with the right people in them. And we formalize this. We'll go through that a little bit later as well. We have faster decision making because each one of these forums can make their own decisions, and they don't have to ask other people because the expertise is at that meeting. And the agency involvement. So some of these meetings have agency involvement, which are our customers, some don't. So we will tell you that we are the GETS Enterprise Technology Service. So our customers, our agency customers, don't get to make decisions for the entire enterprise. That is GTA's job. They can have input, they can tell us what's wrong, but we are doing what's best for the state, that 80% of the state. We are not doing what's best for any one particular agency. Now, if you look at all these meetings, I would also say there's some things wrong with them that we still need to work on constantly. Meeting effectiveness. There's a lot of meetings. There's different maturity levels at different meetings. So we actually have an audit process in place that govern our governance. We're looking at these meetings, making sure that people are taking notes, making sure that they're on time. So since in 2015, there was a real basic list of audit points. And in 2018, 2019 now, we have different audit points. So some of the first audit points were, is everybody coming? Is everybody on time? Is nobody leaving? Is everybody paying attention? Those types of things, taking notes. Now we're asking, are they covering KPIs? Are they covering success measures? Those types of things. One of the things we still quarrel with ourselves is escalations. So each forum might have problems, and we have time frames that they should escalate those problems, but sometimes they change the dates. Sometimes they say, well, it's almost there, it's almost there, it's almost there. And then, 60 days later, it's still a problem and it has to be escalated. So we're still working through some of those maturity issues that people don't get in trouble for escalating problems. They just get the problem solved faster.
So Mark, two questions. I think, first when I look at it, I go, wow, 27. But would I be right in assuming that like 14 of those are, in a sense, those 14 agencies that are clients?
Yes, yes, it would be.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So, those, to me, those 14 are the baseline of the governance program, because those are 14 meetings that we have once a month with our customers. And the customers tell us their problems, tell us what they think we should be doing better, tell us what new systems they might want for innovation. It ranges the gamut. Some of it's firefighting, some of it's strategic. But those are where we then say, okay, well, that's the lowest level. Hopefully they can get different groups to fix those problems. Otherwise, it then gets escalated to some of the other activities.
Right. Question 2, Mark, is, so, when you have 27 forums, what have you done to ensure that there is a discipline or more of a playbook that's very similar among this 27?
So can we hold on to that question for about 2 or 3 more slides?
No problem.
But it comes down to, we're pretty formalized about this. That may be the difference in governance in government versus somebody else. But we follow charters and we follow all the things in that charter. So we'll be getting to that. But the answer to your question is yes, it's formalized, and yes, we have charters that pretty much tell everybody to do the same thing all the time. Okay. So we think, again, governance, it could mean different things to different people, but we think it's a spotlight. We can put a spotlight on things. And if we look at this overview, these are the same meetings in a different view. So you can see, like what I just said with the operations meetings, those are operational meetings. Those are the 14 down towards the bottom left, the agency operations meetings. Those are the 14 customer meetings. Just below that is the service tower operations meetings, and I'll call those our service lines. So we have, I think I said there were 6 of them. We have one for mainframe, we have one for end user compute, we have one for disaster recovery. So we have the different service lines all have their different tower operations. And the reason we broke it up was when we did have one provider, that meeting would go like 4 hours and everybody, it would just be a cluster. So breaking it up has helped us a lot, again, in making sure we get the right people, the right expertise in the meeting, and it's a very focused meeting rather than ranging anywhere from an email problem to a server problem to a local area network problem. So those are the operational ones. The change board is one as well. There's no highlight on here, but I'll tell you which ones the customers are in, which is very important to us. And we actually learned this from Texas. So we didn't come up with this ourselves. We've been working with Texas and some other states, just like you guys work with other people from IAOP, getting different ideas. But the more we can get involvement from our customers, we think the better off we are. And so out of all these meetings, you saw the agency operations meetings, those are customer involvement. The agency management committee meeting, that's a higher level, that's a CIO meeting for all of our customers. We have the architecture, security and risk, and the change review board. So when changes are happening or architecture is changing, the agencies can be involved in that. And we also have the customer experience council, which is, okay, the customers are all involved, and are the customers getting the right experience?
Mark, this is so refreshing to see because, the way you've highlighted, you can see in operational, that's a very, weekly, bi-weekly operations run activity. You start looking at the monthly, which is a, much more overall program review, and then the quarterly, which is a strategic view. Too often we see clients start with this, and then before you know it, the management and the strategic level kind of falls away. In your experience, any tips, any suggestions on how to make sure that all these levels continue to get focused and continue to stay on course?
I've never asked myself that question. So we have, unfortunately, we still have enough problems that all these meetings still exist. I'd actually, I'd want to ask the question another way. I'm always trying to figure out how to minimize the number of meetings we're having by preventing the problems, or at least shortening the meetings. So I'm not sure, maybe from your experience, ours haven't fallen off. We don't plan on them falling off. I would say that sometimes things don't get escalated fast enough and there's nothing to do at the meetings, but we've never canceled them.
Yeah, I think it's about discipline. We find that if you don't prepare well and don't have the right kind of information and don't escalate the right kind of things, before you know it, the senior executive level attention kind of wanes.
Good point. So that goes to, one of our executive ones, the GETS Enterprise Management Committee, that is one in where we, pre-2015, when we only had one provider, we had minimal KPIs. They were there. It was hard to get them. They seemed to be a month late or 2 months late. It was just, I would say, not as automated as it could be. When we got our multi-sourcing integrator, It helped tremendously having the systems in place and having one person try and organize all of those numbers from disparate systems all into one report for our GETS Enterprise Management Committee. And another thing we did, actually, with the help of our consultant, was not only do we have KPIs, maybe I'm guessing around 200, but what we did was, rather than just measuring our suppliers on SLAs, we now measure our suppliers on success measures. So we probably have 10 success measures, and each of those success measures might have SLAs included in them, but there's maybe 10 KPIs and a couple of SLAs all weighted together to make that success measure. And those success measures are in the GETS Enterprise Management meeting. And if they're yellow, there's usually a heated discussion. Okay.
Good. No, that's helpful. Nicole, I see a question.
Okay.
I have, it might have been one that Atul was trying to answer as well. It's with multiple suppliers in the environment, there has to be dependencies between them for service delivery. How do you incent cooperation between them, or how do you govern them to prevent finger pointing?
I'm going to give you one example. I'm sure there's many ways, and other people can tell us those ways. But one of the ways we did it was with service level agreements and operating level agreements. So up until 2015, we did not have operating level agreements. The difference, for those of you that might not know, service level agreement, usually in a contract, usually there's some financial penalties assigned with those if they don't make them. Operating level agreements are agreements between the providers that say, I may have, for instance, a help desk may have 15 minutes to escalate the call to the provider so the provider can work on it. So that's the OLA, versus the SLA is making sure that the problem gets solved within 4 hours. So there's a little bit difference there. And we focus on that because not only do we have the SLA, but now we have different, I hope I'm not going into too much detail, but we have different ways of looking at those SLAs. So we have shared SLAs, related SLAs, and unique SLAs. An example of this may be mainframe is a unique SLA to our mainframe provider. Nobody else has anything to do with mainframe. Whereas we have a severity 1 SLA that is a shared SLA. And if you remember, one of our questions was about ecosystems versus finger pointing. If we have a shared SLA, we have multiple people involved in that. And if the SLA is breached, for instance, if the 4 hours is passed, we might have 3 providers all taking the, I'm using air quotes, hit for that breach in the SLA. So it's not just one. Nobody can point fingers and go, that was a LAN problem, or that was a server problem, or that was a help desk problem. All 3 of them will be responsible for it. And all 3 of them will, it'll be a no on their SLA counting. Does that make sense?
But Mark, you could also track back and see whether the 15 minutes was breached or the 4 hours was breached, right?
Yes, we could. And a lot of times our suppliers will do that and try and finagle their way out of getting a no. And it really depends. We are pretty tight on that, if it's very, very visible that they were not involved, maybe they get out of that no, but the other 2 still stay in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Mark, I think that was one of the best explanations I've heard about, OLAs, and then particularly the way you explained with the SLAs being unique, related, and shared. I think that's a great way to make sure that this overlap that happens between providers, how do you make sure that they actually focus on the outcome rather than, who's to blame, but you also know where the breach happened or the way the issue happened.
Yes. Now, everybody's in the audience is probably going, wow, that sounds like utopia there. Let me tell you, not utopia. Okay. So even with the OLAs, a lot of times we'll come across our OLAs will be green, but our SLAs might be red. So therefore there's a gap in there under understanding, or just the opposite. The OLAs will be red and the SLAs will be green. So we're constantly looking at those things, trying to make adjustments and course corrections pretty much on a weekly basis as to whether we have the right things in the right places. Okay. So as we're looking at this joint form escalation flow, again, this is just another view of those same 27 forms. And this is how we think it flows and how we think we try and push down the problem solving or the issue resolutions down to the lowest level. So if something all of a sudden pops up, this is a pretty good example of what we were talking about earlier, but if a problem pops up at our GETS Enterprise Management Committee meeting, the first question is, has that been in any forum before? And if the answer is no, it doesn't even get discussed. So to me, that is a perfect example of governance working in the fact that people aren't bypassing the system trying to get priority on their problems. They have to actually go through the system and try and work it. Now, if it's a severity one, there's always exceptions to the rule. But to me, that's the perfect thing where, we're not yelling stop and stop again anymore. We're actually saying, have the right people looked at this, because we don't have the information in this high level meeting to make those decisions. Okay.
Yeah, I really like the way, on this chart, you made it very clear where's decision making, what's a formal meeting, what's a council, what's a committee. I think it's a great representation. And I think all of us on the call that are running governance programs ought to do this so that, so that people know that this is not just about staffing a large amount of people. This is about how the stakeholders actually come together.
Good point. It is about getting the right people and the expertise in the right forums. We have had, so I'm going to give you an example of a course correction. So we had an agency management committee meeting right smack in the middle there. That is a customer client meeting. So all of our customers come into one room. We usually have 15 to 20 of them. And then we have all of our suppliers involved, so maybe 8 or 10 more suppliers, plus GTA people, plus some other folks. And the meeting was getting out of hand, and there was, it was getting out of hand. Many reasons why it was getting out of hand. But one of the first things we did was we went back to our charter, which I'll show you in a little bit, and said, who are the right people that should be at this meeting, and who is just sitting here, who is not adding value, who is adding value. And those are the types of course corrections we make every day. So this is extremely important to us to make sure the right people are at the right meetings. And this is just a high level view of that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Atul, you asked a question about how do we keep all this stuff going and how do we keep some of the forums consistent. So if you look at the next one, this is, I don't have any examples of full charters. If you guys want those, we can get some for you. It's an open record state, so everything except for very security-minded information is available to you at some point. But this is the table of contents, and it is in every single charter. So we have a person on the governance team. This is all, well, not all they do. One of the things they do is make sure charters are relevant. This is not shelfware. The charter is at the meeting, at the forum with the chair and co-chair. The chair is always a GTA person, and the co-chair is always a multi-sourcing integrator person, since they're the ones that do a lot of the logistics, set the meetings, take the notes. At the very end of this, you'll see a tool that we're using for automation currently. How they're managing all the risks, issues, and actions. So all of that legwork and that detail work is done by our MSI, and the chair is always a GTA person to make sure that the strategic value of the forum is there and making sure that the forum is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So we always have scope, and more importantly, we put in here what was out of scope, because many people were talking about things that weren't in their scope. So mainframe people would start talking about local area network stuff. And we just said, you need to stay in scope. The meetings are defined, stay within your swim lanes. We have the objectives, the success measures we'll go into in a second, but the inputs and outputs, all of this is very regulated. I would say from an outsider looking in, almost too regulated, but it's working. people feel very comfortable with the process, that it's written down, and if they have a question, they have a place to go look and find out where the process, how they fit into the process without having to be embarrassed and having to go ask somebody. It is all written down for them. Okay, so now we talked about some of this. The only thing that while the table of contents is the same in every single charter, there are some differences in different things. So like timely I think meeting logistics might be an example of some are weekly, some are every 2 weeks, some are monthly, some are quarterly. That's just one example of how some things might differ. The success measures, there's different success measures in different forums. Okay, so that's where the differences are, but these get updated on a quarterly basis, very similar to our service management manuals, which are also very well documented. And we just rotate through them. And I say quarterly, they get updated yearly on a quarterly schedule, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good to see an audit process also embedded in your charter.
Yeah, so that was something fairly new. I will tell you, in 2008, all of this was done on spreadsheets, and different people, different chairs were doing it differently, and it was hard to keep track. Everything. In 2015, the tool was put down, but we also said we need to audit to make sure it doesn't go back to 2008 standards. So we put those audits in place, and it's surprising, while people fear the audits a little bit, they actually take the recommendations, and I'll estimate 60% of the recommendations get implemented fairly quickly. Okay.
Great. So Mark and the audience, just a quick time check. There's about 15 minutes to go. And again, I encourage the audience to both ask questions and make comments using your Q&A and or chat function.
Okay, so just so the audience knows, I could talk about this stuff for days. Putting it down into 50 minutes is a little tough, but I'll get there. Okay, so when I talked about Chapter 4 in success measures in the governance table of contents, I wanted to highlight that piece because it is important for us to understand what the success measures are. But again, being very specific and understanding that the chair and co-chair agree on all of these items. So this isn't a generic example, but instead of gets program measures, it should have the actual program measures. So whichever program measure is involved in that forum, whether it's a mainframe measures, a mixture of KPIs, they all may have something to do with customer experience, but all those things are put in here. All the problematic metrics are addressed, root causes are identified, action items are created, issues are created, risks are created, and all those go into a tool. So I'll tell you what, a tool, if you can,
yeah.
I think I'm going to go out of slide order for you. No, it's at the next slide. You're right. Sorry.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide, if you look at the bottom of this chart, there's some examples of those actual action items. There's whether they're high priority or not, whether they're overdue or not, and whether they've been escalated or not. And I told you, we always seem to have a problem with people escalating. That's why it shows 0. But if you look at this chart, what we see on this chart, especially on the right-hand side from the age of actions 9.1 to 2.10, we look at a severe decrease in stale dated actions. So if you look at the reds, are 60 days plus going down. It also means that there's a lot more, 15, under 15 or under 30 days, because there aren't any that are 60 days. But at least our goal was to stop taking so long to solve problems and do actions. And so that's what this tool is helping us do. Now, I will say this is a homegrown tool. The future is automation, trying to figure out how to automate this. But this is one of the better tools that we have in 2015 that we did not have previous to 2015, that helped us understand whether our governance forums are working correctly or not. This is overall. This is an actual slide. We can, each governance forum can look at this and see what their progress is, if they're getting worse, if they're getting better at solving risks, issues, and actions.
Yeah, I think this there's absolutely nothing like, this visual representation. And, even if, for those of you, even that are using Excel, think about how do we visually represent trends? When I can look at it right away, and just the point that you made, that one can say that the governance group is becoming more efficient in ensuring that the past due items are handled, and you can see the record improving right away.
Yes. And what happens in the forum or previous to the forum, the chair and co-chair would get together, and right now we just have a picture of one or two items here, but they would go through the entire list of risks, issues, and actions and try and figure out, okay, has the date been changed several times? What's slowing this down? Who's not solving this? What do we have to do with it? Should we escalate it? Those are all the things that they should be discussing pre-meeting, and then if they have to, in the meeting. Okay.
Right.
So,
yeah, and
go ahead.
Mark, I think one of the, when I think about the last 20 years since I've been in this business, I think we are at the faster adoption cycle now of governance tools, software companies that are providing those tools that are now leveraging significant amount of automation to help you do these complex tasks in a much more efficient manner.
Yes. And while there's better tools, and I'll get into a little bit on the next slide, but while there's better tools, we still have to make sure we use the tools. So this is one of our things for me. While I've given you, I hope I've given you at least a rosy picture. One of the things that we always talk about, and you guys probably do it as well, day to day, you're always fighting fires. You're always talking about the bad things. You're always fixing things. This is a great opportunity for me. So thank you, Atul, to address the good things that we're doing as well as the things we're trying to improve in. So hopefully, people can learn from those and take some nuggets home. But with the future of governance for us, again, we're still asking, are we getting the value we expect from our contracts? And the way we try and figure that out is whether it be, I'll just throw some examples out there, in automation. We're trying to automate our deliverables and obligations. In 2008, we put together a spreadsheet with a little over 1,100 obligations. It lasted about a month and just nobody ever looked at it again. It was just too all-consuming. Nobody could figure out what to do with it. It was too hard, too difficult, too manual. So we've put together manually, previous to automation, to understand our processes and such. We've put together about 700 deliverables and obligations that we plan on having automation help us take care of. So we understand, first of all, whether it was done or not, whether the deliverable was completed or not, whether there's an artifact that goes with it, and whether it was timely or not. And all of those things happen because there will be emails going out a week ahead of time, a couple of days ahead of time, making sure that people are working on it and making sure that things happen. There's a calendar of deliverables so people can look at it. There's reports on deliverables so people know whether those deliverables are done, and they will not be missed. That's our goal, is to not miss deliverables. But again, this goes really back to our future of governance and making sure it meets our business needs. To me, if everybody's out there, you have a business to run, you have to treat it like a business, treat IT like a business. You have to have your business needs, and then you put the governance around those. And one of our business needs was, again, to have the ecosystem with deliverables and obligations. We talked about the SLAs, OLAs, SMMs, but again, to try and treat all of our suppliers as partners that don't point fingers at each other. A big key for us to make sure that works. The reporting capability, the accounting capability, I think we addressed all those in some of the first questions that we asked ourselves. Mm-hmm. We are so much more accountable now in 2019, and our suppliers are more accountable than we were back in 2008. So it has been moving from the left end of the spectrum to the right end of the spectrum in many ways. We talked about all the different, not easy, having all the course corrections, whether it be in the 27 forums, whether it be at different meetings. All of those course corrections have helped us get here. And we're actually even implementing a lot of lean processes here to make sure we make those little course corrections all the time, rather than trying to revamp anything at one big time. Okay.
So Mark, Yeah, Mark, you've covered, when I think about, people, process, tools, I think you've covered significantly about the process. You've discussed the tools. Talk to me about the people, in terms of the team that is staffing this piece of work, both, yours, which is the GTA, and your partner. If you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, what I'm going to tell you is it includes everybody. What we've tried to get across inside governance is that governance is everybody's responsibility. It's not just the team that's working that has a governance title. Everybody has to do it. So with that said, we have a small team of governance that is managing SMMs, helping manage SLAs, OLAs, looking at contracts and changes to contracts. But all those things have many, many people behind the scenes. So even in our operations, we're constantly working with the operations folks pre-forums to make sure that they understand what the reports are, understand what's in the reports. We're working with our multi-sourcing integrator to make sure all that information is right. And then we're working with all the suppliers to make sure they're accountable for all those things. So I'm trying to figure out how to answer your question. It's not just the governance team. We have gotten to the point where we've told everybody it really comes down to the people solving the problems, that they have to understand that there are governance rules around what they do on a minute by minute basis versus waiting for governance to come tell them what to do.
Right. So you've really integrated the operation folks into your governance program.
A good point. And I want to reemphasize how I know that's happened. Because I would tell you that unless you go verify, it hasn't happened. So again, I've said it once, but I'm going to say it again. When we are at a GETS enterprise management meeting, which is an executive level meeting, and somebody brings up a problem, and the chair of that meeting, which is the COO of the organization, says, is that problem being worked at a lower level forum, or has it been worked at a lower level forum yet? And if it hasn't, it's a very simple answer: make sure you go to the right forum to get that problem solved.
Right. Wonderful. Nicole, are there any additional questions?
I did have one. Circling back to the experience that GTA learned from Texas, how did that come about? Was it via informal networking? Was it coordinated? And Mark, how do you suggest that this kind of learning from one another is cultivated?
So I'm going to try and keep this in less than our 6 minutes left. It's absolutely imperative that you have your own ecosystem of help everywhere. So whether it be IAOP, whether it be, in our case, we have the National Association of State Technology Directors also, which is another forum that's mainly government, whereas IAOP is mainly not government. But developing contacts in all of those areas and understanding and having conversations with people about what they're doing is extremely important. I give a quick example. I was talking with London this morning about transportation and how they're doing their automation of governance from a government perspective. And I have a call tomorrow talking to a private company, Noble Energy, trying to figure out similar items. So I'm constantly trying to figure out, my team's constantly trying to figure out who in the industry can help us get to our endpoint faster. Okay, so that's one thing, do it yourself. Second thing is any consultants that you have around doing work. We've been through state of Texas, obviously is a state, so we talk to many different states all the time. We talk to Montana, Maine, Texas, Virginia, all these people all the time to make sure that we can learn from each other. But then the consultants that have gone before us and either put in a multi-sourcing integration model somewhere else or have talked to somebody about a multi-sourcing integration model, we've used those consultants to gather contacts. And with Texas, it was a little bit of mixture of both. We end up with contacts. We end up with very specific people that have talked with consultants already. And we just go over there and talk to them. We actually fly there and meet them in person. We've had Montana. We've hosted them here. We've hosted Virginia. I assume you guys are doing roughly the same thing. You guys have a little bit of a disadvantage that you can't work with competitors. We have no natural competitors. So private companies would have to watch out for that. But if you can get people that aren't your competitors to be your help, I think that would be a significant improvement in knowledge for you.
Wonderful. Yep, Mark, just one final question, and then I want to end by, again, thanking you. But the final question is, if I were to ask Calvin, the CEO of the authority, whether his investment in governance is paying off, multiple times today versus 2015 or 2008, what would he say?
Okay, in spades. For anybody that's on this call, if you are going to the IAOP conference, Calvin will not be there. I will be there, but our COO will be there, and you can ask him. He is operations. You would think they would hate governance. Feel free to ask him and get the answer yourself.
Wonderful.
But I think he'll say excellent.
Wonderful. Mark, thank you so much. I thought this was an excellent representation of what good governance looks like, and irrespective of whether it's private sector or public sector, I know all of us can definitely learn a lot from what you shared and the practices that you're doing at the Georgia Technology Authority. Thank you so much again. Thank you for your time and your contribution.
My pleasure. Look forward to seeing everybody at IAOP, OWS.
Wonderful. Back to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Atul, for moderating, and Mark, for the content you delivered for us here today. For anyone interested, this was recorded and will be uploaded into our Knowledge Center. And again, to echo what Atul said, we hope to see you in the next week. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.